O God, make your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Minister Statement Justice Gowdy. Mr. Speaker, do Correctionals Act Kisimu Makoni, October 29, 2021. Najite do Correctionals Registration is do Dako Dizekasi, do Legislative Downdi. Metako zagen di zeke tenesi kali kweko dezeniketeti. Ejiteke me akesi. Te ozen de zu agutule tene kandi nushiare tisia. Handine goni guta. Handine de satule. Dandi teneko galai tasi. Ne zugo kedin dida azgon. Desi met a Rome, met a policy, met a regulations kandi ta head. What's a statue is a kind of Zukuwagonet as a go Tizekea. Is correctional accuracy, the Honataka, go now they you. Go now they metase on down the gute, down the generation, the Azurgotin digity, method as a go. Tizekea. Down the dudes and causes the retity. Then a song on the coders and the gedeti any day Kahuti Chows they say. Because the Tezeki Agite. He died the correctional officers, Kandi, Dandi, Gutsakan Diaz, Kizitaka, Rogonet, Twade. Ijimete Honda, Kandi Gulia, Legani de, the Kotazana get the Deni de, Tina get de, you could how did the Kegade. Yundago Gani de. The Committee Advisory Board said the Tishukai Gaganda, Kotagon Divi Yogetia. The Agzaki, how then that the inmates see two legos out. The correctional meta Aconi see, Mete Honda say is as a go. Cause any day, and any day cock the rest as a go. Cause the right issue. I see the Kizi Kandi, Nezu, the Nasi Kandi Tanya said, Daisy Zogan de as a go. Down the child, the rest is a kid town. Mr. Speaker, the Correctional Act Mr. Hornet Asia Siemens Dadikazana Tatsakiane. As long as you met down the Genability Correctional Service. The inmates then a tau probation target any day correctional service any day Nezuko Diazon. Tizek any day Dule Yagadi Legacy 8 years later. Duna had said she can't see as it Lala Meconi any damage and Honda se catule, then a chiago the Seze Casey. I see Chilica get the jar go gago on the town. The saw was a metanizer in on the Tizeke. Then I go to the Dene Della the counseling a shoe, cause a dandy at the condisi who yogin de and Diego Niguta and Yasi Konikinitia Tule. Tizeke la Mazehonda si tenesi, Tandi si di Tandi Taki di Honda Monizian. Adeka Chusa Suye Naganisi in de Cogateni te Catule, Etata Gagete. Tizeke si la to take out in de gant any day, Metane Zoo, Metago now the Jues la Dago Canes, aunt Tizeke. Yundawa Tandi si go new. News in the Megamasi. Nezuas in Lani de Casinia, Mr. Speaker Masi, the NWT Correction Service, the Kizigalaki Daisy Masi Goodis Yazagon, the Andizaki Conigo Salati. Candini de 24 hours, 7 days a week. Candiza go all on done. Cotata de Indians and Naki. Azona Hoti, Masi, Mr. Speaker. Masi Minister. member statement knock put. As also easy massicuri siene se di agent che sia e che je agent nursing station che ma massicuri si hutli e galagenda se zani che galagi te che ta ade agent Merry Christmas e si curi si so se onda e je si agent Dene Zhatıé 2022 zeke je zeke men dadi ko dana sendi so ti si a Roman Christmas na hedu si ne zu na he ko ne zugo a tia masini Monfi Mr. Speaker, the Health and Social Service on the not the alcohol and drugs the KC 90 Chile ko tweet kia the onze ko chagen dia zong ne zuna ke te ke ko chao dia na khia zong na ke sala khati ze ke ji meta hutli na he chi ale na hoti kala khageti tu ti si je honeta chigo se ko cha jogo ti ji tha chegete Dene si ta jogo cha chi kwa ko ne si di ti jua kala tu ni si ko ga chiu de ti khan diu ko go wa go tele chi kwa ko ni e ti ti sa ne zu ko te ga de di te cha de ne de ga ge ti ne zu na ge ze kha ge ti ti chi kwa ko ni si 12-year-olds do Kandezi Akago Tonati Chiletagiti. Parents are saying, at the Tizico Jago Galagi taking it, the Kandigo Aron Tanesi Kandezi Kotati as go. Yundago Akagitea getting. Sala Kikandi Chilesi Nadi Chileko Tasi Tauti. Aron Tumora, the crack of cane, Kosanaji, the Kidati. Chigo si ze Kennedy Chilesi Kandi tu Romodati. Mr. Speaker, the Hutli Wanani say in the whole teacher, as you take Casey di Tisi, the Kotwe Nati Chilse, Ethan Kandi si Chiao the Sini Kago to Quickosini, Kedesi Lane they tried to get it. Do 90 Yagon, government Lazata getting the Azon DJ Casey. Alcoholism is a drug addiction. Government, the orders are Gogalaganta regions, community to yellow lives only. The common good of 5% of GNWT operational budget is addiction on. Mr. Speaker, it's on Mr. Speaker, government, she saw the program the Guinea the region J quota the Kozi quota, then a go galaganda zagon. And the case government see, then they see cargo quota ziga to Jagan Diazon denied the there. I not any day minister died you can end the massively. Massive Hay River South. Masi government oil co agent de KZNWT zekia, Mr. Speaker. And tema que si me te a huti kulia gocha kama kyo dicho. On the government kutsaken di zekia. Huti meta dea gocha. Tati tanesi kandi leadership si kagane tani de kalao ki gago dena gola gogalaita as go tije kesio. Mr. Speaker, naki politician ni si ka te na hot easy go desi so as go. Na kiana ta as go 카즈 레간데 디고 자이티 제케야지 나캬지 나키 존이 나게니라 나캬고가 라이 다시데 아종고가 간티니데 카지타데 네주가 제자 네주 카툴레 메테가오데디 다 레지던트시 고고데지 다 우티 갈라간다 간티 사갈라간다 시디틴 고자이티야즈고 아종시 산디라시 카고데가오데디 아주 고자이티야즈고 간디니 데네주 사고고고 와둘레 다디나 제테제 케시 고제니 데 다로 시다고 자이티야 둘레시인데 해고데가오데디 유지고 자이티야 Mr. Speaker, the Kandira Indio Kiwa, Jesse Nagote, do Nane Silaka, go Tagide to Nanakala, Godegaudi. That is a Kandio Kala, Koti Sikandisi Zagendi. That the pandemic is in the Honda Songulia, which a government Zakedeko. Do Nasheza Ajonsa, Nashesi. 고자이티 저거 짜다든지 저거 듀아큐니티디야. Mr. Speaker, agent river here 고자 agent WTC connaît goûter les Merry Christmas good sienne c'est agent de kizi. Merci. Techo. Merry Christmas, agent ma hulu sienne c'est Mr. Speaker nishu. Koza agent staff de kizi. The Tushi Kandi Naga Kandi Galaganta to take out in Degi. Staff is in Koza Eji was a shooty. Nahoti Sika, Digi Galagant as in Masikuritia. Mr. Speaker, teacher Kesia Tea, Koza New Year's Day, the Kandisi, Agence riding the Masigurisi, the show riding the Kikato Deche, Kakisa Enterprise Province. Agence Masigurisi, Sechita Nagadeja, Koza Siguasi Tashi Masigurisia. Two why could the G Dage Kotazi, the COVID the Honada Godeji Godegaudize. That is a case Kato Deche, Editia, Kahuti Godegaudize, Kategaki. Masi, a road that chose Gaudeshis, Masigurisi, is a case in Kandi. Na heko onto na kia na go zan di dati na hete gaudi zindi di koveteke tazo a ronkala haji na hetere ko tazeke zi kandio kala ne zu haji ni tezeke zi kato mokute na kia ji ni tezeke zi tene son kandi na gala gite jia kokeko haji di tezeke zi dati tene ko tazeke zi Masige ni zazo di tene kandi gala gite ta masi tiemele se na masi chotita choji mete honda con les zu se de gaudi teia tiela ko de jin dage koko de gaudi handio se ne zu si ko ta ka zu de ju zao di e kwa ko ti si ka za di hanji wo na la kandi le kandi si ne zu koko wa go de Tasi te kesi se soti Merry Christmas, Happy New Year a ron la hedusin. Masi. Testene a con los undi masi. Te bacha. Masi. Tite kesi Ajosoti, Mr. Speaker, Ajon staff, assembly, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Gulusi, Ajon Tan, Ajon WTG, Tekezi, Konezu, Kodegau, the Tuteati, Kotesi, said the batch I see, much good to see this. Kala down DC, say Galaganta, Tamacha, Kotsachu. Amyagi teji my team, it's much good to see. salt issue. Masi ko de sia. Se lié se ja je ta ne zuna hete ga le di. Ko zen di New Year's ke da wo ta de di masi. Merry Christmas. Great slave. Tu la kita ko de kia le ko te ko san. Tu si masi na hedis. So the si kan di ja ro Merry Christmas good is in Great slave te ke si a ro ko tin de. Ko te staff to a ro masi good is in sa. Uti ga la gin da ti te ke si. Tu te ke si. Ta a ro te ne si ne zuna hete ga di tu te a ti za. Ko te ne zuna te ko te kya ti. Ko te shi ne zu hete wa ti. Ko te ni de ji te ke si kan di si na ga. Ko ne zu ko di. A me chona hea ke ti le si ko ka kona di. Se mo ko te ne de a ro si. Ma si na ko te ti te ke si ko te ma si. I ring se ka ke ni la ma si du si di. Yellowknife North. Dite si Mr. Speaker, tu si te a ti gani de ne si ne zusa e galagenda ko te si tu e de jagi leni te kwege de ti a go kandia go za ti a go tu te go tin de ka go de san le so dite ke gulia go ze leni de labor board si de ke gulia te le a ron te ne si kandi si sagen dia zo te ne jagi li de government education like you can't do like go was on as well. July 2022 was. But said the Lord as wrong that he can't do Manitoba to can't do go. It's a two legislative see. Go on dite guardian 5 days with the two legislatively. January 1st in the can't do. Did take a BC record go to go in the court is the case. It's a can't do again that the sick leave take here. Na kitauti da kan du mo ta ni mo ga ta le di pandemic ji hona ta tue kan di si ko de ji na he de ga di ta na hi si di working for the si kan di go ga lai da sick leave a si chan paid sick leave a si chan ni de ha mi ta ne te la kha kan di go che le ta zong de ke si kan di go ga ni ta de ne so an di ma si Mr. Speaker. Merry Christmas, Mr. Speaker. 2021 is the good year to take out in days. Can you call in the organization? Can you call 2022 la down there? You know what they are coming to Mountain. Naki take Casey New Year's high. I see it on a Lagazanta. The housing needs social decay. Economic cost and assessing legals and that says Katume Teddy Dione. Let's I didn't. That Mr. Speaker, New Year's Agina Wata come to ditch on a Zema was saying. Ne zoo a CC na hot easy na joking the agitake on Tesio. That we see a Jean's constituent, because he a Jean's casing. It is that Diego Tesi got a legislative assembly sorting to go Galanda, got the Northwest Territories echo. As Rosina Henry Zut here, Titi got it, got the family got it in the Zuandi. Merci, Mr. Speaker. Si te kesi gan, te kesi ki, son pa te kesi mo ko se akala. I mette o le de se ga ko o le de. Tu te ko tin de te ke gani de. Down to me ta te ti te ke. COVID-19 te ke. May 28 October 14, 2020, February 10, 2021. Ditseke mogo kuinde. Di kandi son pazeke sin. Kandi sa tu le ko tsaiti. Dandi Yukon Nineveh zeke Nukini wo zeke sin. Ditseke ga zan tazo di son pazeke mining zeke na zia di sin. Tu mga ko ta. Di sin. Kandi tu ga la ta le kama kyo la shon. Ta tu khi ga 11 ta ni yo ka kon di go ko ta ti ka la xin mo wo zhen da se two secretary federal government ta di go the agreement Great Bear Lake Remediation Project KC 2021 mo go na ze ka din di ka lan da de go ze na se a ze go ta kan di ze KC ga zhen da ze go a xi ze KC ta ne xi kan di ze KC na ze site xi Gatan Dazon 1,661 sites on Gute. A Jisi Gatan Dazagon was a $12.735 billion SRKD Gundi budget J. GNWT 2021-1920 AD 278 sites. Education jurisdiction Yathaland 75 million. Die satte onze ne zoate leazegon die kandite ke programmes in line tu te kotlin de hygiene de tu le gotandi goteni de tu le metakote gaude di Norman Wells Polytechnic University ke kandisa tu le mo gote yao jinde ta ti te ke ju kandisi kamaganda ti te ke siu chiu di te ke ji gatanda Ta tu se ne de ministry da du kene down dia ta ti mo da ti le je ke sion anti wa ta ze go Mr. Speaker Masi Camley Mr. Speaker tu esi je ke sion Di chizu da ze ke wo gu zhen de kyu zhen yu si ke di du me ga zhen da ze go me ga zhen na ta ze go di NWT kan di si ze ke kyu ge ni se xin a yi ji ga zhen da na hi zhuan du na he ke go di kan di zu da si kan di go di me kyu di ze ke ga xiu kan di ni de public chu kyu ge re zhuan ta ti ze ke ji kan di si go o du yu kan zhen yi me ta ti ti ni de tu le kan di sa tu le na hi di services ya ti le tu te ko tin de kan di de na ze right si kyo ti ko ze ka go ko gen de ze ke ko ya ti ji chu ya e ti o ze ka gon di le ta ko ni wa zhen da go wa go ne te ze ke mental health issue ze ke ta kan di me se la yi ze ke zu da ji ya ta ti zu da ji kan di ji ko zao di ze ke ji ga zhen da ze go di kan di ji ga government ka ko ge de so song di na di ta ti a go za gen di di ze ke ji 2019 ze ke ji kan di ji go ai da 30 years to go to politician is 880 times all the cuts di ni 이제 게디 유칸제 게단디 갈라겐 다시 이 팀의 오제코 고군의 주니우트 time Mr. Speaker 나히티제 게지 칸디시 메가탄 단데 두 Ministry of Health Social Services 리두 디디다디 클레디게 데이지 대 오제네 조아티피아스고 수다지게니 제 게시 다이도 모즈니시아 카 헤에네사 고차전 디니 대송 고산하고 와고 올래 고차 존제 계지 칸디아나 해사 뒤지 칸디 루테가 잘려가지고 마치 Mr. Speaker 아조 메리 크리스마스 나해르시 네주아티 고제 네주에 되게라 아디니 나해자시 나해자간디야 디니 뜻다나 생시가 뒤서 전디 마신디 Nahende. Machi Mr. Speaker, Al Reimer Award is he. Western Canada Award Dene WCW huje. The award is la come to honata then members organization to KC services go association province KC on the Galanda. Amiri the Kig Kakako the lazy the Kandizi Galanda, the public water, wastewater works is the Galanda. Al Harris, 2 IATT, Museum Danito. That is a case la magazine containing the province territorial water the case on the Galanda, the public water and wastewater fields the Kiana. The Dandi Modishwa past board member president, Northwest Territories Water and Waste Association, AC did ya yun tatanigin. Did an AC Kandia see the case Galanda. Al Harris. Member NWT the KZ 2007 goza board the KZ 9 years goza. 2 President Northwest Territories WWA the KZ 2 5 to 9 years county board ke president. Al let's see Al Harris is you Fort Liard Hamel Gagalanda manager municipal service. Any deco Galand that the plant and water site the case here. The wastewater operations the case are zones the case la Cantigo Ganeto. That the board certificate small system water treatment operator the case class 1 water treatment operator got the Candy certificate message in 2008. Al Masi Candy Museum Dadento. Masini the Yunda then a County board members Nigino. Mot issue Hamel Fort Liard Masigoti Conti that the counties Guagalan dati the case here. Is the Kani de the counties Gagalanda. Halati he titia tenet Songo Galanda. Hutlia Galanda. Then a counties Kotatekea. Tadi tissue Nezuga the Galide. The water go to wastewater services here, so as in WCDC, go Nezugo Arnide. Mr. Speaker, must see the LSC, the Dundee Wagalinda, the Fort Liard go to Condizim to the Chandin is one. Must see. Honor Lord, go to Merry Christmas, na here see, go to Soti, see the carrier, must see. Must see member. Sa 2. Monsieur Mr. Speaker, agent de Kézi saute ici de Kézon Massi Kurusi, dit Kézi, the government de Kéni de Massi Kurusi, dit Ké. Hita, dit ici, en d'ici, the self-government agreement de Kéta, quand d'ici, Gatan Taita, dit en dit, go. Ko te ga de di KG kan de masi ko de sene sa tu te ko tinde haron congratulations Dylan ne te ke ko te se riding de ke haron te KG masi ko de si ko te si nye kan di ga la ki te tu tane te ga ko te si kan di si handi ga kan dati ita te masi Mr. Speaker Merry Christmas haron masi ko te Merry Christmas la de sindi masi Haver North. Mr. Speaker, this is a case that also the 2020 sen la there. The 2021 la the also I need. Can do ka condile. As on the case sago di do I con is a good chandi. This is case. The chat and this case COVID the honeta hutiana headache siuka se kagucha. A rongon is you choil the co. Kaduka the Gadite, so in see Masiguri Sienet. She car wrote the Kiji, got a Masiguri see the business that you got Zaiti. The West Point First Nation here made the count, Kaga 2 First Nation is a key. She Masiguri see is it a case, you are wrong the Kiji Masiguri see. dia na ho ti si so kan di si ko ju si a tu ko ka ma si go di ti a zo a ji ta go zai ti ze ke si a ji ta na za gen di he friendship center ko ma si go di si a me le si na ki ka go zao ti ni te na ze sion si jun a zo si kle a tu da ge ka du ka na za gen di a ne zo ni ze ko ze chu COVID outbreak I go cha a si thong ta health security here we see ka huti galakin da kam gyurish ta ti khandi ni de tene sin ne jo ko cha ken di da ma si go de sia zo so sa che ki vi se ti che ti che ke shu ma si ti si chu ta si khandi si kala di che ko cha ke tin de ni ju wa ni de ta a ron organization a ron tene si tu va si ma si go si Merry Christmas, good to see you. Happy New Year, good to see you. Go Andy, Masin. Here South, or question. Teacher Casey, la NWT Power Corporation, Zeki Karushinet. Mr. Speaker, Teacher Casey, met out a Titane Kandisi, Koa Sule, Dame Resource Huliati, or Nightinid. Kandia, Mr. Speaker, met out a Teacher Kega, than the non issue. Shana Sela, Tule, 100% employee. Atan Dani Dene Zhatıé. Adieu Kaguchale. Mr. Speaker, the Minister NCBC the Kazia Gaude. Je met policy la Jion de Tai de Cadesi, down Dion de Yendi, Masi. Masi, Mr. Speaker. Aron Canada, tout est côté de Casey. Ici, cut the Casey vaccination policy got a go. NCPC, the contractors is January 7, 2022. Ici, cut the Condisi that you won't tease. Condileni de car to Condilende live without pay a gotelia. The COVID, the honor down. That you won't in there getting. Mr. Speaker, Teacher Casey, without a Teacher Casey, a seat long Condisi Razanda. The Minister, Tiajo NGBC, Hesi Condisi la Condi. Che Dene Zhatıé candida ti go as go wali Mr. Speaker, agent de Casey la tika candisi che te e già mi dice che te le si andesi safety training go go de te as go a si che te le ni te ka kandin de zo ko tatu go chagi ti kandisi ganda staff members si e di ko ta si ti ko ta de di vaccination ji hola ta ti je ke ji me ji hola si issue a ja ta yi go ga gi ni ta tue kandi ya I ti ji khone se le go ole ka gu chandi yi go ta che ka shin di ma sin Minister, Kandisi, Tenesi Kandisi, Tazo vaccination agitel de ko kakalago zao dili yani. Mr. Speaker, agent employed ici, isi kati a combination kotsa ko kyo di the Human Rights Act honda da ji te keisi OTT la kandisi keta ikena ke te atule NCPC kala ko te employees esi the policy khada galagan ko tseogen ti asi te ke kandi kyo di te ke gani de isi tuisi la kim gatan dale the Human Act keisi ga kandi ji te ke kulia go shiny de katule megatan ko teni de tule go taiti di ko tate keisi tula kandi go ole the corporation de keju ti te keisi kandi ji moda ti chole ko te gatan ta na het the right ko te NCBC regime te employees gatan ta go si ko ji te keisi ka megatan ta go di nane tene kandi ta ti go til ko ka ko me ko ga lai ta go yen the pandemic esi come chiude dei giorni si te che mi chiude dei giorni kandi ka ko te ago come chiudi giorni employees esi sako ne ode ti odele ti se che che ta kandi ta ti go tin de si ti go de ta minister la si ti le na te kati ji te che go ta di e na gi ni de tene kandi vaccination policy te che NCPC ko te candida tigono toni desa situle go lagono taji te kiwade sindi masi. Mr. Speaker, is ke health professional ke NWT Chief Public Health is the vaccination te organism COVID-19 ke gani de vaccination is ya zone Canada ji metinide tane kandi gala gi teshu Jako TIGPCC Kandisi Konezu Tanesi Kogala Yundagenide Kala Kandisi Nideti Kandisi Keke Anite Kadi policy the KG Sadi Ragan that in COVID-19 take when you must. Yellowknife North.
Step of introducing some paid sick days for workers under their employment standards legislation.
6 days ko ga o si te ke o go sene ta minister si tu le ti ganda ti te ke ji sa go te ayen di sick leave te ke paid with sick leave ayen Mr. Speaker e ho ka ko te zilandi a si te ke ji di budget ji hola a ro si na he te go TZK wireless GNWTZK program target goodly on the T. Ijitas Santida Magatan Tazago. The employment standard KC Ka Candida KCQ Diana the employee take. Do the KC la Aron the KC Magatan that the paid sick leave. Is a any day staff zoo go to me attack or attack haggy please in take Giradis. Could they dagger tagut so the kimori shola is a case. Yundala tag on dear and dag I on dimo good any day. Giamagaita, I don't the case la car, he cooked in India as gone. Ta got to the good out the case, good out the liatuli. Is a case get on that a good and the machine.
Much larger conversation to happen if we're going to do this. You know, how many paid sick days? Are they funded like vacation pay? Is there some GNWT contribution? There's a lot of different ways this can look. But when we do a comparison of currently unpaid sick days in the Northwest Territories, it's clear our employment standards is
unpaid sick leave, which is your day. Is the minister came and gave you only take that's on Dida says and Lani de la Dondia and the machine.
You see in it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, when we look at this review, it's something we can look at. There's
Kachukandas, the unpaid sick leave the case. That's a jurisdiction June. That the country may action method land, Megaita. That is a case EI benefit you got and that sea sound method. It the pandemic is image one that the car is just in linear the comment I would idea to go. The government the can't do Megatan Dazo, the public health system treaty to cocaine did as go. That is a case Megaita as go Omegoita. That is the case Cataliani de Megatan Dazo, the budget that had down to the end, you must see.
For Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've tried to find some information on this, and I think key to having this conversation is knowing how many people currently have no paid sick days. I expect the overwhelming majority do. We know that all G&WT workers do, and those with collective bargaining units certainly have paid sick leave.
Unpaid sick leave like I tell on the Condigo, Nakiakamiki George Tekesi. Condigo. Is it a kelasi, a midi la condisi a gotagandi, a mila mekego on the Eucharistienes and
North Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I don't have that information.
Is it do condisi tele, condigo than a condisi, employee standard act as agati. That is a key. Condigo 6 days a case go and the employers are got lots of Nakinaki on Dele. Kandi the Kaja Kika Dizin La Hetele, Tizeki and the Masin.
Supplementary member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess my next question to the Minister is, as part of the review of the Employment Standards Act, is that information the department could try and find out? Could we engage with some of the
Department La Situlayan Tade Quagan that the small business secretary, the paid sick leave secretary, or Tiasiti do, he's a casing I end. Talo si, Kulia Gucha changes Tagucha, the Employer Act secretary de, is Gatan Dani de, the small business security method lane. Due a si the Kizimo Cosiagon and Modisholisio, the small business secretary. Ita members is Jimagai la Hani de Kamo Gutia Tuliende.
Questions, oral questions. Member for Nivik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't have a chance to ask my questions yesterday, so my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the Minister state or commit to...
Minister, situate the financial statement, the home care bed, the long-term care, 48 because you are in London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. We have some loose ends in this.
Minister at the Tika Mekaita Titekesia, Mendadi Quaita, Sombatekeshu. That do Hesilaka Mekazan Taka Kalameke Galaita. They say Kandisi long-term care regional hospital as it tau in Leni de Hon Kisana Zese on ta. That is a Kelaka Mendadi Quaita. Cote Tenakandika Kitesi Yewogeta. Nakila 48 beds, 16 beds or Hitla. You take like Kodeti 9 DZ Honeta Hitla at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to reduce the demand for the larger regional long-term care facilities, support for elders are going to be needed to be provided in their homes. So can the Minister commit to use the financial savings to provide the support or bill?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a bit of an apples and oranges situation because we don't usually take funds dedicated to capital projects and move them into operations and maintenance.
Funds are capital projects and maintenance at the Tazon. Sago Tesson Batega Geditia Deco, a Sigo Sana Mayas allowed the capital projects Yadli. Sandiaman Dadi Kathitlia Dule, Kandula Metada Ade, federal government, the Tiason Banagagile, the Kandi Quente KZ, community care funding. Kandio Yitako KZ, Regional Health and Social Service Authority Z, Yizi Kandisi Yagaganda, Ajidi Zeni, the KZ, Kago Tomagaitan, Itame Kanita, Kandindes.
Member for Nivik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know in the health centers, the nurses that we hire are CHNs. I've said it in the House. They have many roles that they play in the communities, and home care is just one little.
Minister. Tizeke la tane te la kandi si ko kandi la go watne on tizeke kandi si home care zeke tane te tene la than egala ki te jizeke o mikuru jana sandi.
For Nivik Twin Lakes, Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, following the Home and Community Care Review, which was completed and presented to the members of the Standing Committee on Social.
Member Standing Committee zeni ne chuti da mo gun deji 2020 imbe ko cha megaita ko cha ti ko ko cha ti je keja ko kanesit ko che sandi da tule tene kan deji ko ta kha di chua mega la ko che li ni te kan deji la cha ta ze den dia kanita 다 사고 저가 이때 제 기회 나제 가게 된디 나제 가게 돼. 다 다운 디달라면 와이때 아이제 계시 디탄에시 대 오전 소하고 단데 제 계시 보포 델타 region 제게 이제시라 two regional home care roles 아시다 two 칼라 메타 시 니니다 오키 오키조 칼라지 셀라yen 마신.
Final supplementary, member for Nivik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask when, but I don't want to use my last question for that. So can the minister identify or provide the total cost?
Minister, situle Kanadi. Minister, situle the Health and Social Services KC. Situle the Ron Elders Homes ke kote onda Queenie nage tezi ke rokotin deze ke kota kota chile sa choge ni de kote Housing Corporation ze ke kandishu kwe kandiru meteni yale machine.
Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, next year we're going to.
Mr. Speaker, DZK Kandi Yuntani Nichia, member Lakai Gurjan at DZK, Tanesi, Kandisi Kotao DZK, Takarita Taga Azek, Ta Kandisi Gats, Kanita, Adine Mawaite Adile, that Tisa Yuntani Zechia, Ajon Zeke Gane, the Kandisi Gazan Tazek. Jizekeni deka kozanti atule dizekea. Adene demaga plan new dia kasitli atule. Ajidi sombatani de o didi la te 11 meteni de koze etan dida megwaitea. Ta dizekesi ka modati. Ta dikantir meseni yaiti azgo. Jana himeni te megaita indezo. Tule asikandisi yuntanichu. O Tiaote, Tantuagonde, Cosenite, Mekio du Jane, the Candida Harata Siseni Aitini, Massini.
Yes, sir. Oral questions. Member for Mumfwee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, for the Health and Social Services. Many NWT residents have watched
Health and Social Service Dr. Kennedy Murphy was a Sonatana Dutesi, Condesi, si chile kandi si ko twida daga ko ta du ze ke si kandi za yang lai ba ko a ji di la me ze hone da du le ne zu staff ha ze le ko ta ze ke yan di ni mas masi member do the health and social services ke si
Specific applications for services and programs that communities or Indigenous governments, in some cases municipal governments and NGOs,
다지 제케시 데네시 아시 호키 타타시 간디 자고 자겐디 다디 나게데 나제제 제제케 코 간디시 메타고 자이티 디제케 프로그램 니니 타코 타제케 다디라카 아조 도이트리메체 손바시 메체니세아데 온즈 카제추 다투 메가이타 다투 트리촌제케시 코타제케 나제 요구인데야 디 시에고인 다지 단니티아 디 마시네스 디 프로그램 송와데 간디고 카송 간디제 메가 송바 야세 라운데 디 송바제케시
in general are all the same, which is to provide community-based responses to issues that people identify. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you. In the field, mental health.
Outreach worker community
Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the community has used the funds that I'm talking about to hire counselors, there may in fact be someone in place who does
community counseling service go all in the continue da de somebara to a ron kayan di yagun yagute to the cotton degen
is the place to go for immediate same-day follow-up. I also want to mention that where communities have connectivity, we have a mobile phone.
To mobile phone china headset to le na jogende hujago uti kuli da zago chani de ti ke jitane hogo zao ti ke gani de ijila da lo si ke you know sagini den tu le go ze yao gin de ti fonda kandi ti la ijia di ti ke ji ke ne sa tu te go tin de san ze ya go la ke ji ti si chi le da che de ke ji ga de.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you. Can the minister identify what specific community
시듈레 OTD 코타제키 community based program 시 가잔다. 데네시 카디시 듀오 쿄노고 가제 듀노고 후티 다게 아지 와르신디.
Mumfui Minister responsible for health and social services.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just run over the general list. The community counseling program, which I just mentioned.
Community counseling program como goinde. 예시 딜라칼 same day service again la suta kandize ke ta gande school ne je ko ta di counselors si a ron je ha chi kwa zandi ko tse ju ko zen di je ku ta ko zandi on da si a si lo kandizi di kandi ga ko la gu te NWTG and da mo lan de je ke ka tu kandi ya ko la tene chi tene go zao di ze ke gani de huti tage ani de tu tene do se to shi kandi la zia de the health line chu kandi gunli.
Again, the three specific funds: on the land healing, community suicide prevention, and addictions recovery peer support. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you. How does the Department of Health
Department of Health Social Services ko sanisi ko gala genda ajili che kesi kada dane kan disi ko chia gede teze di okyono ga tuno ga the child care counseling career counseling income assistance chu dang dia ko za di le yan di
Minister responsible for health and social services.
Yeah, thank you. Providing those wraparound supports is very important.
ni ji wraparound support si me ta de a le ki department on de le son department le ga la ki te da kan dia ne tu na kesi me gaita the transitional housing che ki u gute ji che ke treatment de ke o ti na te ke shi o ti kan di go tu le na ge de che ke shi kun ji na ke te ji kan ti me gaita ka tu housing corporation go ga lai ta ji te ko se ECU go ga lai ta kan di te ke shi ko zai ti or justice ji go ga lai ta di che ke shi ga zan da ne ta di minister justice te ke de ko ka me o me te guinde di che ke shi ga di te ne shi kan di ni te tu le na ge de che ji te ke ga ni ta ko ze ni te ka la di ji ta ko zai ti te ga ge de te shi ya ko ze ke ju ne zu na ge te a go di che ke shi la ka a si ko ni a de ko la he ne si za you want to take a shindy machine.
Oral questions. Member for Kamlik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Justice. Earlier this year, the Minister and I spoke in the House about the Men's New Day program.
Minister of Justice, the youth programs
Minister responsible for justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the New Day program ended. It was not renewed by the Department of Justice, and so.
Department of Justice is the program is ka me loco kalai sombasela. Tamen do see la the program se gala talan de goodly program does it legini de. Is it to me kani taji tekimantani tatu. And you got the hoti si gaita. The Tinagala Gitisi. Kandia she got and that's gone. 2017 study the work again learn. Ta Ajidi Tekesi Takidin DC la Kota the Kiaji the Win base program Ganta. Got any day as he met a Honda she the Nagatu Lediti. Ta Kota the Kesi and the Eddie Clacy. Niki Leni de Ijigo Sombati Hali. Kandia thing do.
I think you could request up to $40,000 for 1 year. There was limited uptake on that, and so some.
$40,000 is you any day Kandista go later.
We're at. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister might remember I already used his words against him in February of this year. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister can speak to how many or which communities are taking part and what the total budget is now for the program. Thank you.
For Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The funding is still $290,000 a year. The funding has been fully allocated for this year.
$290,000 Dagayasu. Taga is in County, Cochin Tribal Council, Friendship Center, Bishopcombe. First Nations, Eke, is you 7,000 Gotia, Little Quazeke. Is you can't do Gotila, Kiwago, Tasia, Candia, Sombago Tatitland, the Masi.
For Kamlik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering how the department will evaluate the success of these new programs.
The continue the other youth programs, the KZ Kandigo, Zagan Dinda, Tandia, Yagaganata, Tansi, Nezua de Etileta.
And evaluations are something that.
see me Gazana Taze Geni de Ka Mekani Tati Somba Zeke. Da me Zesi public si Metago Nila Agucha Dizeke. Nakia Nakizi Mekani Taji Zeke. Ikegala Tale. Tati a own contribution agreement Zeke Metata Diti. Kandigo Sago Zegale. The case can't the program Zeke. Because the Ketana Zena the Digita Kala Dagondigo Oji Mekanita. Taji the Kizin Damagan Dani de Megu Oni de Tule use the Q and Zego Sayandi.
Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Kamlik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the strengths sometimes of really good reports or evaluations are the
Asi Gazana Tazaki, you met Ahutli, Dandi Gala Tazaki, Zikyo the Kotazaki, Kyokirijo, the Kantizaki, Tatana Sonsi, the Kotagia, Tinjiki, Kandeta Tate, the minister, Tizeki la di Kandisi, la Situle la Zekadindi, Dandi Nuzini was a case you on the Masin.
Responsible for justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the member about the type.
Ka Etiadindi, Tadindi the case, a seat the case, Shigala Tate case, Gazanda. Catulene Zekadesiko, the Ajizeke Gondizi, the Zatin Lata Hardanizo, Ijita, Ijia Gade, Asiti, the evaluation of the any day. Cantu da Asita case, Mogotandele, Ijita Twin Magonete Kayat, Somba Zekedeco. Come, watching at the standing committee go to Kadusin and Dizekation on the Mass.
Questions, member for Framelick.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My questions are for the ITI Minister, seems to have the lead on a remediation economy. In my statements in May, October, February, and again today.
May, October, February, Zeke Dukaru more than Zeko said the Somba Zekation to take out in days Zeke Gadi day. A down did a la. Down there, the economic recovery Zekation was a thousand in Dene Zhatıé. It's 11 days at Zekate. The ministry situated at Zekadini. Tizeketamo, not Zekaya Tizekation on the machine.
Member for Framelick, Minister responsible for industry, tourism, and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department of E&R is the lead for the remediation economy.
Tizekation Tamo Gondation. Editia Kotaza Lati Economic Recovery Zekasiga. The committee members are going to India. Ita Department E&R Zekasi. Ejikai. Isi Kai Tete Holandi Galagi Deti Zekega. That's this minister who can't do method law. Ita Tizekasi Katule Ketamo Nezeko se Arjoin le Co. Until the members see the discussion paper car, Mogozan Tizeki play, Kamaki Gotan Deo Kala, Kalana Gotale. Tajita Kamega, some Banitini Lazi, the chemical Janese. Do the Kalale. Until Kada Sisi, the Kesi, Hazan Dani de, says a Lani de, to the federal program, with a good day. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Agetike, a program to see car to the meta galite tiny day to the Nike needs the Sunday. Candida to la Roma condition at Zathiclia to Leon. Tizeke, Tandigo or Zekesi. What's a Tanation condition will go down and the end must.
Oral questions, member for Framelick.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. And clearly the approach we've taken to date has been a dismal failure. From what I've seen, we continue to pitch this investment as a way to bail out the extractive sector. Federal support is not a way to backtrack on polluter pays or absolve the private sector of its liabilities. So what assurance can the Minister give me that we're going to change our bailout approach?
Minister Lajidi Zekezi le Megate Goniti or Situla Zekati, the County Contaminated Radiation Program Zekiadisini.
For Framelick, Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree that there is any sort of bailout program, and so in that sense, I suppose I could simply say there is no direction to go towards any sort of.
Mr. Speaker, that's what the program GST the coin the Kayo Onako Sana target is in Mendadi Quaita. It's a Wasitulene Zunita is a case you can do Nahedu te go in Dego or Zizek. Tasimega Sombas had landed the Catula Cathedral on that. Masi.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I think part of the problem here is that we have no concrete proposal that's been.
The concrete proposal the Lazy Cardina heads already 28 sites a kg round. The Aron the Kizim Gazana Tazagon. Say it as a liaison. Cause is a Kikatula Gozandi. The Minister, Otila di Candisi declared the contaminated site radiation programs at Kigaris. Otia declared on the Gundi.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, ENR is the lead in terms of managing contaminated sites and the contaminated sites inventory. The Department of ITI certainly is responsible for liaising as well.
ITI did go data around the KCO. Mr. Speaker, the KC Laka Mendadi Quaita, go de Tidaco. Go take a lot down the Mr. sites at the Rogaita to the good in day. Candigo co-owners Yagot. As all the KC can do the federal programs at Kiane. Yundago Rani de Sandia Tesla Liazon. And then a wrong department Aquaget is imetasla Tule. The Chicago took us in Lago, Calamanaze, Conticati Legiteke Gardis.
Be a Christmas present, but maybe we'll have it in time for the Easter Bunny. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. And as my Christmas present, this will probably be the last question I can ask of my Cabinet colleagues in 2021. We have an extensive inventory of contaminated sites, so there's lots of work to be done. That work should also be part of a key part of what the Polytechnic University might look at as well to help build capacity and capture opportunities for a remediation economy. Will the Minister commit to regularly update regular MLAs on her?
The regular MLA say Kati Minister, the radiation work take Garis in the Basi.
Frame Lake Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's too many times where perhaps a member from Frame Lake and I appear to disagree. This isn't one of them. I also agree that the remediation economy is one that we need to be looking at.
Kati the Kizim and Dadi Quaita, Sene Zumakanita, Sine Tamakanita, ITI, Zologo ENR, CCE the Kizi. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, Clenet, the Ajon Tedita the Kenny, the House and Yosh.
Coordinating, but it's a lot of good work that's happening, and I'll definitely make that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haverhill South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last couple of days.
Haverhill South at the Mr. Speaker, the KZ, Kandi the Kikatan at Tamaganda.
And wearing some of that art. However, Mr. Speaker, the NWT Arts Program promotes
NWT Arts Program the KC Houndanda is la Downty da Gucha to do the Kotlin Degi Jiwan. Masi
for industry, tourism, and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a number of initiatives that are.
I see. Mesela the art zeke woko te meta ko zao ti zeke gani de son si mesela come kyoda sho the khade si ji da ni gilde tene kan di zeke sia ita di zeke si la ka di NWT house program zeke sin kandi si ga yi ga ge na ta ga la ta ti ze ke si tang di ko zao di ze ke si a si long kandi ka go ti ali ti ka mo da ti ka ma ga ta di chui sho ta go ti yi si ze ke an ta ji tu ze ke si Mr. Speaker tu Winnipeg Art Gallery a si tu te go tlin de ze ke si e ko za na ke te ne zu go te ga di ze ali a si long go 90
social media following. There was also a show across the pond over in the British Museum. So we're doing our best to get the word out there, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's good to hear the enthusiasm in Minister's voice. Mr. Speaker, the NWT Arts Program offers, as she said, registered artists the choice as well to have a public or private profile on this website. But I guess the question I have, what does this actually mean? And does this allow for art to be sold on that website as well? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to get some information about the difference between the two.
Arts website si art condition the website ki ko 90 kantiwo di jago taza sala media ki tesi teke izeke information is go on de come on na te kare sia dule di kandi teke yende
In terms of the promotion that they might get, but certainly that's up to them to be able to decide. The Northwest Territories Arts doesn't actually sell art or sell artwork, but there is the where to buy section.
Northwest Territories Art go
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department promotes the NWT Arts logo as a mark of authentic artwork in the marketplace and the website as a tool to find NWT art and artists. Does this logo differentiate between Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists, as we have Métis, First Nation?
The Indigenous, non-Indigenous artists si teke gazanda Dene Zhatıé website ke yeganda.
As well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at present, no, the arts logo doesn't differentiate between the artists.
The artists si teke kandi si te go tinde ke artists te koni de ka yekagana tan. Itati teke kotia si teke kon yoga information ke the arts profile ke liatule kandi ko zeni de
Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I took a look at the strategy, the 2031 strategy this morning, and I noticed that it was silent on distinguishing between Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists. And I think that, you know, by not having that, not distinguishing, we're missing out on a big market out there. And I think it's something that the department should actually look at. And Mr. Speaker, you know,
the department you can't Tony Dennis you wanna say the arts she said last go this is target the adule ita is the she he need things go the
government looks after the cost of managing it, and so we can get that, you know, get the artisans' products out to the world. And you know, and I don't see anything like that. You know, all I see is kind of Facebook and like Kijiji, eBay. You see some stuff on there, but you know, you really have to look for it. And we need something that's central to the NWT. So how is this accomplished or to be accomplished?
Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so again, at present, that's not a distinction that is being made, but we're at a good moment in time with the new art strategy having come out, and a lot of work happening right now to determine the future of ways in which we're going to promote arts in the Northwest Territories.
当地arts kesin ta ko ga lai ta ze kesin ka la ya sa chona zeni dong le yu nei dong ni de ka ko zai dia du le dia rong arts ke tu te ko tin de ga de sin.
We do certainly have the Seals and Sealing Network, which does promote specifically Indigenous crafts based on sealskins. So that may be somewhere to start and somewhere to see just how.
Da xi xi gang de xi ko na yan di ya ze ka yang di ze ke ka mo ni ti ze ho ji ti hon da ji kan di kyo ni ze ni de ho ne zwa son de ne se ji da kan di kyo ni ti ya du len de ma si.
Sir, oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I already got my early Christmas present from the Minister of Finance when she tabled the 2021 public accounts yesterday. And in those public accounts, Mr. Speaker, a trend that has continued for a number of years continues on with the GNWT exponentially getting sued for more and more money, well over $100 million right now. I was just hoping the Minister of Finance could shed some light on what is going on here, who is suing us, and why does this number...
Responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't know I was going to get called Santa Claus today. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't know that I'd characterize it as exponential growth. I am able to look at, of course, all of the various lawsuits that are issued against the GNWT. We don't have any control over who decides to sue the government. Access the court filing records, and in those filing records they would see who has sued the government and for what amount. The number of the 107 million that's being described here, that is for a contingent.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll have questions at another time about if we can somehow perhaps take what's filed in the courts and get it somewhat public. I know there's some tension in doing that with matters before the courts, but I guess I want to talk about after that process. You know, none of us want to see $100 million all of a sudden show up in our budget. If we do settle these, and I assume we'll settle them for much less than that, does that get reported publicly anywhere, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. So when there's a legal liability, that's where there's an amount. Is reported in the financial statements, and when there's
financial statement
then that is included under the specific department that is involved with that particular litigation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know in the past, both by myself and by the media, there have been questions about, you know, when we do settle cases, what happened, what lessons, and there's kind of been this tension and resistance to not answer them. Sometimes I have caught them in the specific department's public accounts or in a supplemental appropriation if it's significant enough and they can't find it internally. I know that happened with the Norman Wells Health Center as an example. But can I just get some clarification of when we can't answer questions about public money that has been settled?
Public money
Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if a matter is still outstanding as a matter of ongoing legal
Kala mo ko chan de ko che kala me ki gu tia tu. The government che ke di tia ye ka ki ti ga ra. Che ti tan ka dia si si ne ki ti ta khan de zo tu le mo na che ka ti ti.
industry standard, not necessarily anything to do with the government, that there would be confidentiality provisions associated.
Che ka si so ka di si mo ko chan de le che ke me se la de ra tu ne che ka de si en.
Litigants who have put themselves forward don't want their information shared. Mr. Speaker, I can say that having looked briefly at the list of outstanding litigation, a large number of it is individuals who have claims of As an example, I suspect that many of those individuals would not want a final settlement detail to be included in public accounting documents. So that's what makes it difficult for us as ministers to come out and to stand up and to try to
Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect there's a much larger conversation here about the appropriateness of NDAs in society generally, and with the government to, sometimes ask for NDAs when perhaps the victim does not even want them. But I guess I'll go to settlement agreements that are contract disputes. I know in the past they have had confidentiality requirements, which I think if we're paying out millions of dollars of public money in some sort of construction dispute, we should have a principle that there isn't one, so that when I see that money in a corresponding budget or public account, I can actually ask questions about it. Is this something the Minister of Finance is willing to review?
Minister of Finance,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, as far as going back and looking at the settlement provisions, that's probably more of a question for the Minister of Justice.
Minister of Justice is already
Certainly speak further about this not in the House, but it would be drawing on my own experience as a lawyer, where that's not the role I'm in anymore, Mr. Speaker. So, we can certainly, we are all
Auditor General ko che kan din de committee shu ko che kare sia ze go on yi kan de din da si ze ke xin mo ko chen de rin de due yin da ko chen ni ze chue de members gan ne chue due di ma xin.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Mumphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay. I'm asking
Mumphrey ze ke si ka ti ka shi ta na du ke ne Department of Health Social Service Addiction ze ke si wo zu da xi le ka ti na di ji le xi a zhong di school le xi mo da ti ga mo da ti program la dang di go go on di ze ke si elementary high school di chi kwa xi di ka di ze ke si du ka di na di ji le go ze ko chu ze ke si ta chia ze ze ke yo dang dia mo zu da ji go ze yao jin de le yan de.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I feel like I would like to consult my colleague, the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, to provide a
So the is a kind of thing that is the more consideration conditions.
Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Thank you. I know I should have addressed Minister of Education as well, but I do have one more question, but it's more technical.
Member for Mumphrey. The Minister like to respond, or no, take it as comment? Thank you. Oral questions. Member for Kamlik, sir. Kamlik?
Sorry, no, I'm trying to keep up with emails. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to start with a really quick question for the Minister of Health and Social Services. My really quick question is, does the Minister of Health and Social Services expect any closures of healthcare centres in the Northwest Territories due to staff shortages? Thank you.
The staff to get either la city healthcare centers the city staff and go take it.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give a really quick answer. No.
Hele Daudi.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Kamlik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's my only question I have on that one, but I'd like to go back on your list for further questions.
Thank you. Oral questions. Member for Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my next questions are also for the Minister of Health and Social Services in regards to immigration medicals. The federal website indicates that only a panel physician can perform an immigration medical exam, and the NTHSSA website indicates that all of our physicians are panel physicians for the purposes of immigration medicals. Contradicting that, the federal website, if you punch in that you're trying to locate a panel physician in the Northwest Territories, it indicates that we have no panel physicians here in the Northwest Territories. And so I'm wondering if Health and Social Services will work with the federal government to have our NWT physicians added to the federal website. Thank you.
The federal NWT Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member has referenced, the immigration medicals are driven by the federal government as they...
The immigration medicals, the federal government got lots of allowed. The Kakati, to tell us to the county at the Legotlin Day in the case. The case Gandhi can't do it to a federal government. Editia got lots of law. Editia get in the decatu got tacit. It is a Kagane immigration medical dick. Is it a Kala for two Jonaki? Now, one was really does it, they can't do it.
To have an IRCC medical performed in Yellowknife because while we don't have panel physicians, major centers are not required to have dedicated panel physicians. I think the key here is that when the person is making an appointment for the medical, it's really important to stress
medical rather than the immigration medical to method on the Kuli got out at and you got out the any day end.
Member for Kamlik.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that from the Minister, and I really hope that we can get that fixed as far as coordinating with the federal government to have their website changed. It does add uncertainty for people traveling through that process here in the Northwest Territories. I do find as well that I hear a lot from constituents who they do contact NTHSSA to book an appointment, and what they find out is that there is a lengthy period of time that they have to wait in order to complete that process, and sometimes that puts them to
the county got any day got nice in Canada year. The and these the any day they got in the immigration any day. Thank
you.
Thank you, Member for Kamlik. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we're in discussions with the federal government on
federal government
members' point that the service turnaround time is putting undue stress on people who are counting on that turnaround time in order to secure their immigration status. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamlik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we take a jurisdictional scan of Canada, we see that the average cost for a medical in Nova Scotia is $200, the average cost in Ontario $300, and in
200, 300, because it's your Yellowknife is $675. Ta medical la down dia de 9DEC2021 yendi.
Like Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the member can point to anything that is cheaper in the NWT than it is anywhere else in the country, and that certainly is true for health as well. So what happens here is that several factors come into play to
Asinda method la candida de kadeti te kotlindegi. Ne zugo zauti nite, good the good tea the gigaditi. Chest extra greater the other day tione. He killed a Johnny de Alberta the content de goodly. With it.
an additional cost that may not be relevant in the southern provinces. But we can certainly take another look at our fee structure. We don't want to overcharge people, but nor do we want.
Supplementary member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd say hugs are cheaper in the north because everybody wants to give them. It's the last day. Well, COVID-friendly hugs. Mr. Speaker, is it possible for NTHSSA to work with the federal government to even the playing field on immigration across Canada?
Si tu le federal government go galaita, the immigration Canada ke tau. Si tu le NWT zagen zataget India tu le immigration Canada the medical zeki ayane.
For Kamloops, Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as an immigrant myself, I appreciate and value the role of immigration in our society.
The immigration zeki wogun desi ka masia din mega society jugun liand. The desi soti si la chagete. Se taju jong sa go tanain de plumberly. Can't you desi where the gaudi the GD. The clemo gun desi. Ta nezu outle nite candigo codeji asi son mese la tute cotlin de gani de ita situé mogonete cadesia cathitlia desia tue ite kesio ta kaji candia se 11 de masi.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has
Ka tu tsatsiki mi de yendi masi.
written questions. Member for Mumfwee.
Monfi, written question. The Ministry Education problem question. Hasitlon, Modati, Agent Dadete, the post-secondary education teki. Aurora College, Lacan DC, Quetzalcoatl, the Adult Education Learning Center. The Center Zesi Tauti, Aurora College, Diploma Programs Tauti, Klichomp Danesi, ADD Duko Niguta, got a teacher in the social worker, nothing was at her. You take a remote learning center, taking ADD any decades Lale Kodakaza Chuntile, the Quertau, the Galata, the Yundani Zago Gani, the Kozaguru Koko Tagalata. Tutse was a Tanate Somba Governor's Territory Kyogise, Jikandia Sita Kesi Catalea, than a Candita Hadile, Tute Yundi Shilagai. Okay. 2018 Kotela Dane de la Aurora College is a case in nursing, education, social workers, Dante Kotegori. Dane de Nesi to take Kotlin Degisi, grade 12, Kotekala income support Gageti. Minister, situated as you mate Katlikonde, Dane de indigenous teachers, social workers, nurse, as he do the Northwest Territories. Aurora College, Chesi the county report la daito as the teacher social work program kote duego with Dakarich teacher go. Masindi.
Written questions, replies to Commissioner's address, replies to Commissioner's address, petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Mr. Speaker, DC, the workshop is here to attend the machine.
For Justice.
Minister responsible for justice, Mr. Speaker, DEC Northwest Territories DEC 2020 annual report 10-year report DEC 가서 단디 마시. Municipal Community Affairs. Mashi, Mr. Speaker, DEC mo 가르신 Operation Report 2020 and 2021 Western Canada Lottery Act. Mashi. Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Now, Mr. Speaker, Northwest Territories Housing Corporation Annual Report 2020 and 2021. Yundanyochu. Mashi. Northwest Territories Power Corporation Minister, do DEC report 2020-2021 Northwest Territories Power Corporation, Northwest Territories Hydro Corporation is in the new tune, and the Masi. That's a new tune. Minister Health and Social Service at the follow-up letter, the oral question 8/20/19/2 staffing at Stanton Yellowknife Hospital, Masini. Masi Minister.
Motions, member for Frame Lake.
Motions, Frame Lake, Masi, Mr. President. The Legislative Assembly DEC Board of Management DEC Yundanyu Chuinese Legislative Assembly DEC Executive Council Act.
A Board of Management in accordance with Section 26 of the Legislative Assembly.
The Legislative Assembly DEC Legislative Assembly Act. The DEC at the Uki law to Hita DEC here in North DEC the family members see DEC Board of Management see Mr. Rocky Simpson here South, Mrs. Cochran Yellow Angel DEC Coach DEC Tani Committee DEC Agelia DEC Tai New Victorian Lake, Mr. Killian Cam Lake, Peter Martellus Tabata Coach the Masi, Mr. Speaker. Masi, motion conduct on questions the arrow and nothing.
The motion is carried. Motions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas the proceeding of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories and all of its standing and special committees are conducted in accordance with the rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, and whereas the current rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories were adopted on February the 12th, 2021, and whereas the rules of the Legislative Assembly have been reorganized, and whereas a copy of the revised and approved rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories was tabled in this House on December the 7th, 2021, and identified as table document 527-19(2). Now therefore I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that this Legislative Assembly repeal the rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, originally adopted on February 12, 2021, and adopt the newest version of the rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, identified as table document 19(2). And further, that the new rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, upon adoption of this motion, come into effect February the 2nd, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has
Takati motion that is on 4719-2. Is a Legislative Assembly replacement a condition current that on. Member Tabacha, that is a case la Haver North Zata Dindi, that is a rule for. Is that Thursday, December 9/21, got any day, Wednesday, February 2022. Got a talo sees a case meta, concandine satisfy mega suni dead speakers in Katu, you go to on the council members that say Assembly goes on the any day. Queenie de public gets calculated in a gargan dark to do a garganata. The speaker is in the Tiano, the Dene Zhatıé courthouse in Cocha, Candinaya, that is a Kizikatale. That Queenie de calculate Candisia Senior Zetty. Massively. Massi.
with Member for Nevicton Lake Signature.
You got the new victim lake, the Richia, Sika, and Narishian.
I now call Committee of the Whole to order.
You order of the Committee of a Whole, Hay River. So, Madam Chair, to DEC Etewati Yati Tatazi DEC Kakala Galaganda, Huli Galagandara, Tuishi DEC. Da Massigo duty, then a condition, Massigo to duty, the Satageti.
Thank you, Member.
Massi member, Frame Lake, Committee Daganide. That is a case here, Massigo to sin. The Chilla chair is Duka Nezuazi Ladi Massi to Cindy. Motion car, Kimogotan Deodele. I draw in a sen, I didn't need extension, motion that do Kanyeta Massi.
May I please have the report?
Ta committee as a whole, New Twin Lake. Mr. Speaker, Bill 23, Bill 29, Sikanazu. Ta dedication
Member for Nuvik Twin Lakes, do we have a seconder? Member for Frame Lake. All those in favor? All those opposed? Madam Clerk, will you ascertain if the Commissioner of the Northwest Territory
Commissioner Northwest Territories Margaret Tom do not second the machine.
Merci. Please be seated. Mr. Speaker, members of the Legislative Assembly, good afternoon. Masi ejokashu na hena thita fa kutsanaiga daleta sitseda masinathe. Gutli egalandaga. Gutli egalandaga. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Masi Juna Tati, Sago Jesi, Narandale Masi Nese Karinawat. Sago Jesi Juna Taita, Tizeke. Hajon Nasina Hedu Shines in the Kligalanda, Kotanaida, Tiziko Jesi. Nakikatu Hai Konstu Konezu season ahego odugai the COVID-19 dazona tajo a seatlon na tesela. Ijajina na teseja isi la ka la kagoti ka meti honeta na tse the onze gote hu meti hona hinate nije. Dikako diko nago sango diko kalan dazete diko nize azgo. Se ajite ke na hina kesela ko jazone ke naundi kenandi ajite ke si na hete gaude zeisi na hikare na ke ko jaji galan dazeke. Indi ki ga go zeisi di pandemic si ko de ji na hete gaude zi. Di te ke si ami na hoti si go hulde e di pandemda go te go sanya sisi. Nakika go ga nata di chi masi go ni te ta di tu kala go ndi te ke si masi go di ti go te ka kala yun da go go no ji go ani te me te hone ta aji te ke si na te mo wa se aita. Da te na ko ta te na di te tu te ke si na ho ti ze ya di ti na zani 고전아지 constitution 하종 이교게데 종 세네 줌에 딱해나 전디에 이지 시간 팀나면 따라 세나 자든디 나 노치나 장디 고제권의 주시나 해하고 된디 마신 two commissioners in Northwest Territories two 고제니 데 너고네제 bill tradition bill 24 이지테케 악티시 제케지 December 제케지 이제야 데릴레 제케요 bill 30 the accuracy to Aurora College accuracy data azule bill 31 the pharmacy accuracy data azule bill 32 the Kotlin Dege Employees Benefit Service Pension Plan accuracy the Nendea to Likiti. Bill 33 National Indigenous Peoples Day Act is issue. Bill 36 is the accuracy to Northwest Territorial Court Act Yundazil. Bill 42 Ajidi the Kemogo Tata KCA Appropriations Act Infrastructure Expenditure bracket number 2 2021-2022 Megoju Tandi. Bill 43 the Supplementary Act is Ratanda Expenditure number 2 2021-2022 Megoju Tandi. Bills 44 is Jumogotata, the Operation Expenditure Boring Authorizations Ekeon, number 4, 2020-2021. Bill 45 to appropriate an act infrastructure expenditure 2022-2023. Masicho order.
With that, Commissioner, on behalf of the all the MLAs, most importantly the residents of the Northwest Territories, we extend our warmest Merry Christmas greetings to you and your family for your service.
Commissioner, Christmas greeting. That's out there. Azon Hahot is it. So it is Azon Masi, Commissioner, Northwest Territories, Masi. So the Quebec Masi Commissioner Margaret M. Tom Night Hadin, Masi at Jose Magaita Jonat Hadine. Masi, Diaron Tatagiti, who Tiagalaginta, Gedesti. Is you Masi Koditi, the Tivizi Honeta, Nezu at the Detit on Masi. Members, to Masi, Rona Heda, to Handisi, the cases that is in Carnacha, a seat long on the Sedeti, the COVID-19 outbreak, within our quota, the K, the building, the K. Can Digo Car seat long, sending it on Johnny Chambers. Because CC with the Honda Dene Machine ahead of Siennason. The challenge of the Quincy Carnezon, a seat from Galaganda, must see the nothing as a water half dear. CC must see they say, Tina the Wagner policy must see. Like he called Daisy to Daisy, cause CC Nana said the last year the Kizzy on the good theatre. Members, she not easy as it doesn't easy like your Kaziti. Because a mossy, not you at it. Because a short seat song, the Zoom was say out it, the Desti, the call. The now hoti, she not he got an out is a care, to the city, tidy right alley, sound delay. Conflict got the get out the tea, the go out the tea, sound delay. The Candia Galate, Kaka, the other members. The take no hoti, in Chicago, the take Dana Hegeti, she go check it in the good diantele. Candigo, Hajidi take target is go decharge go, it a decharge go disecation. This rest is a Kakandi Katita. Masicho, congratulations, Dene Zhatıé. The Quincy Kashinagaretia New Year, Candigo Kala, she Gaida, Tazigalida. Na he la Kakala business dog with the committees governing with this na constituency go later. Tazanati Nagachi Hutago the code Kanandi, the holiday season I get a wild chine Nadaji. No hot issue here, got an hot issue. No hard noting. The assembly take duty says in Arathela. The PVT Tennessee did not again the Tiacho Goagalaita, say must go down the The car holidays is see, could the G Dage Candy is not at the Negachi. Candigo Kako de Knago de Gini de, you wanted to go, I was a son to go down. Candy and a song Candy, Dule, Tagan dia Dule, because the negotiate here. That the Candy, the Casey, and the Candy Merco de G Minunison, Kukuanda, Kukanata, Kuzandi, Ajigini, the Casey. Nakidu te go in dig in the Candia, the Chitiasid, had also taken the Desia. The Candy, the K hold the city, taken on the Nezot at the Wati. The public health orders he started, Gatine Street, Chine Gelugati, and Dege. Must he so Dene? Mr. Speaker, orders of the day, Mr. Clerk.
22. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Bill 23 and Bill 29, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Clerk, DC, Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, 1:30, with the Canada Day.